Hey there, John Morris here, and in this video we're going to talk about working with MySQL in PHP. Now before we dive into the actual code, there's a couple things to kind of get your head around this that I want to talk about. First off, when it comes to working with MySQL in PHP, you could write an entire book on how to do that. In fact, there's actually lots of books out there. I even have one that's a thick, probably 500-600 page book that's just on PHP and MySQL together. Okay, so there's a lot that you can learn and when it comes to PHP and MySQL. So in the scope of a PHP 101 course, obviously we're not going to cover everything that you can do with MySQL. Okay, what we're going to cover is what you need to know to be able to work with MySQL, how to connect to the server, how to select a database, how to add data to the database, how to update data, how to view data, etc. We're going to go through those basics so that you are able to actually start working with MySQL and you can start to learn it. I personally am still learning MySQL. I'm still learning PHP, but I mean, it's one of those things that it can literally just go on forever. Okay, so what I want to give you in this course is what you need to get started in working with it and kind of understand it on a conceptual level, as well as a level where you can actually get in there in the code and start working with it and kind of understand what you're doing. Okay, so that's going to keep the scope kind of in check for what we're going to talk about with MySQL. That said, the next thing to keep in mind is that when it comes to actual PHP, the PHP part of working with MySQL is actually really simple and really easy, and it's really not that big. And we're going to actually cover pretty much most of it in this video. The other side of that coin, of course, is the MySQL part, and that is crafting MySQL statements. And so as we go through this, you're going to see code where we're creating MySQL statements and we're getting results from a MySQL database. Those statements are really what MySQL is all about, and that's a MySQL type thing. And that's what I'm talking about when I say there's lots and lots that you could learn there, because there's 100, probably thousands of different ways to craft MySQL statements and get data that you need and get it in the way that you need. Okay, that really has nothing to do with PHP. PHP just, you create the statement and then you get data back from that statement and you work with that data. And so again, the PHP part of it is really simple, really easy, and we're going to cover that in this video and show you how to use PHP with MySQL. Of course, in doing that, we're going to have to cover some of the basic MySQL steps. So we're going to do that as well, but again, we're not going to get into every little fine detail of MySQL. There's just no way we can do that. Okay, finally, the last thing that I want to talk about is I want to give you kind of an understanding of MySQL and a MySQL database and what's going on a conceptual level, so you can kind of get your head around it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my database, or my PHP my admin here, and we're actually going to go into the WordPress database. And I go into the WordPress database, one, because it has a lot of tables that we can look at, and two, because it's an example of a really well put together database structure. Okay, so you'll notice that first off, we have our server, which is localhost, and in that server we have a number of databases. Now the analogy I like to use, because it's so familiar with people and it actually fits really well, is that of an Excel spreadsheet. So here's how to think of a MySQL database in relation to an Excel spreadsheet. So with an Excel spreadsheet, you have individual spreadsheets or individual files. So for example, this one is default, it's named as book 1. Okay, you may name it as taxes.xls or whatever, but you have an individual file. Okay, think of that file, or actually the other way around, think of a database as one of your individual Microsoft Excel files. Okay, so it's the entire file with all of your different sheets and everything and all your data inside of it. That's really what a MySQL database is, an individual database. And of course, on your server, just like on your computer, you can create a whole bunch of different Excel files. On your server, which is just another type of computer, you can create a whole bunch of different databases. In fact, you'll see we have a whole bunch right here. We have a total of 8. Okay, so that's kind of the way to think about a database. Now, within your Excel spreadsheet, you have these individual sheets, right? And that's kind of a way of grouping individual sets of data. So if we come to our database, and let's go to our WordPress database, you notice that we have all these different links over here, which are tables, okay? These are all the tables within the WordPress database. That's exactly like the individual sheets that you have inside of an Excel file, okay? It's just a way to group different sets of data, but overall, it's all in the same file or in the same database, so it's related, but it's a way of an initial structure and grouping it, okay? Now, if we go into an individual database and we go to look at it, actually, let's go to the structure, okay? Now, within the table, which is just like a sheet in MySQL, you're going to have fields and you're going to have data, okay? You notice that these are the fields. Fields essentially correspond to your columns across the top here. So if we go and we browse the data, you notice that it looks almost identical. You can see we have our fields across the top here, just like we have our columns across the top. And in fact, a lot of times, most of the time, these are referred to as columns, and then going down, each one of these is referred to as rows, just like you have rows coming down here, okay? And so these are kind of the different types of data or what kind of data you're going to be collecting. For example, the ID, the post author, the post date. And then these rows going down are the individual entries in that database, okay? It's just exactly like an Excel spreadsheet. So if we were to come in here and we were to put ID and post author, and then we were to come in and fill an entry, we would have 1 and 1, and to mirror our thing or mirror our database, we'd have 2 and 1, and on down the line. And of course, we could go all the way across with all our columns. But as you can see, it's just exactly like a Excel spreadsheet. So that's kind of the way to think of a database and kind of get your head around it. It's really just an advanced, sophisticated Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, okay, that allows you to store a whole bunch of data. Now, you know, the hardcore developers out there will probably be like, you know, throwing a fit about me saying that, but really that's really what it is, and that's the best way, especially when you're starting out, to just think about it. Okay, so that's how databases work, and that's what we're going to be doing with databases, is storing data in them and retrieving data from them, updating data, deleting data, so on. Okay, so in this video I'm going to show you kind of the basics of how we do that. Now, if we go back to our server and we go to our databases, notice that we have this MySQL demo database. I'm actually going to delete that because that's the database we're going to be creating. So we'll go ahead and delete that. And in MySQL, deleting is called dropping it. So just a little heads up on that. All right, so you can see it's not there anymore. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go, in this video, we're going to do a couple things. One, we're going to create a database using PHP. We're going to create a new table in that database, and we're going to create some fields in that database. And then we're going to create a form that will submit data to that table in those fields and store information in them. And then we're going to create a page where we can view the data that's in that database. And then we're also going to create a page where we can update the data that's in that page, okay? And so we're going to walk through the basics of doing all of this so you can see how it's done. All right, so first off, let me just kind of do a proof of concept. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to create.php, and I'll be going through the code for all of this. All right, so let's come up here and let's hit this, and you'll notice that we have a couple messages that show up. It says connected to MySQL successfully, database MySQL demo created successfully, database selected successfully, and the table created successfully. Okay, so these are messages I put in the code when I view this page to let me know that every individual part, and we're going to talk about all this, happened successfully. Now, since I've created this database now at this point, if we come back over here and we click on databases, you'll see that this MySQL demo database has been created. So now if I were to refresh this and try and recreate it, it's going to give me an error. Error creating database, can't create database MySQL demo, the database already exists, right? So that makes sense. So that's why I put those codes in there, so that I can see what's happening at each step, and if there's an error that occurs, then I know exactly where it occurs. Okay. So now if we come back over to our server here and we look at this MySQL database, first off, you can see the database has been created. If we click into it, we're going to see we have a table called demo1 that was also created. And if we click into the structure of that, you're going to see we have 3 fields. We have an ID field, which is basically just a numbering mechanism, so we can number each entry into the database. And then we have our input 1 and we have our input 2 fields that we're going to use to submit form data into. Okay, so now let's talk about that creation script and how it actually works. Okay, so here is the create.php file. So there's a couple things that you need to do right off the bat. First off, you need to set your database access credentials for your particular server. Okay, so typically, it depends on your server setup, but a lot of times, for example, I've worked with hosts where the database user, you go in and you create a database. Actually, you know what? Let's just go ahead and look at mine. It'd be a lot easier to just show you. Okay, so I use a company called Heart Internet because they allow me to do reseller packages. I don't actually resell right now, but it allows me to create as many domains, and I pay one fee for all the hosting for it, so it's kind of nice, but it's however you want to do that. Okay, so if I come into my server that I'm using and I go to MySQL databases, how mine works is I create a username, right, and I create a password, and that creates a new database with a name, and it uses a unique setup where it creates them unique. I don't want to show them to you because I don't want to show you, I don't want to expose my database names and things like that, but I would come in here and maybe put a database name called demo1 and give it a password like that or something. Okay, and I would create this, and it would create me a new database, and it would take this name and it would add some stuff to it to make it more unique, and then it would have it with this password. This would be the name of the database, and it's also the name of the user. Okay, now with some other different ones, then the way it works is you create a database, and then that's completely separate. You create a user, which is completely separate, and then you grant that user certain privileges to that database. Okay, so it all depends on how your setup works, but ultimately, however it works, you need those credentials. Okay, so let's go ahead and close that, and let's go back to our create.php file. So with those credentials, you're going to have a username and you're going to have a password. Okay, and then almost pretty much all the time it's going to be on the local host. Okay, you can just pretty much leave that, and then for the name is the name of the database. Now in this particular setup, I'm using my root user, which has super user access, so it has the ability to create databases. Okay, so if you remember, the database that we have didn't exist, so we didn't I'm writing the script so we don't have to go into our server and create the database. We can create it with the script. Now, you may or may not want to do that with your scripts. However, I want to show it to you so you know how to do it. Okay, so I just set the name of the database that I want to create. In yours, if you've already created the database, you would just put in the name of the database that you've already created, and then you would leave out this part where we actually create the database. Okay, you wouldn't need to do that because you already created it. All right, so that all said, next we set some variables. One is the table name. So again, this is the name of the table that I want to create. Okay, and then we've set some fields. Okay, and we put this into a multi-dimensional array. And what this is the fields that we want to create. Now, if you look at this, you'll see that we have our array. And because I haven't specified any keys, it will automatically make this into an indexed array. Okay. So if we were to come and we were to comment all this out for a second here, and we were to print our fields so we can see them, and we go back to create.php, you can see we have our array. Like we talked about earlier in the arrays video, we have an indexed array. Okay, and that's all we really need for our purposes here. I don't need to create an associative array. So, and in each, so we have our first level array, and then in each side, each key or item in that array is another array, which makes it multidimensional. This is the second dimension, and we have the name of the field, we have the type of field, we have the initial, I call this initial value. Some people may call it something else, but anyway, it's for the ID it's not null, meaning it can't be empty, and for the others it's null, meaning it can be empty. Okay. And the reason that is because for the ID field, again, it's a numbering system, so we always want it to have a value so that we can number the entries that are put into it. Okay. The rest of them, it doesn't really matter. In fact, we have to have them be able to be null, because when we first create the table, they're going to be null unless we're going to put some default values in there, which we're not going to do in this case. So again, we have the init not null, and then we have the increment. Are we going to auto increment this field? So again, for the ID field, we are, because again, it's a numbering system. We want the first entry that gets entered to be 1, the next one to be 2, the next one to be 3, the next one to be 4. So we want it to auto increment. The rest of them we don't, because we're going to be putting in specific data into those fields. So we don't need them to increment. Okay, and they're allowed to be null. So that's fine. So you'll notice that we have our increment set to no on all of these. Okay, so again, this is just a typical indexed array on the first level with an associative array on the second dimension. Okay, so again, like we talked about in the array videos, it's just a normal array. All right, so now, and that's what we want to create, and well, that's going to help us create our field. So we'll come back over here and we'll uncomment this. And now the next thing you'll see, we'll actually get rid of this, is we have this p key equals ID. So which one of these fields is going to be our primary key? And the primary key is the primary, it's the one that's used as the key within the database. So it's the one that sets the numbering of the database. Okay, so you're going to set that, and more often than not, it's going to be your ID field. Okay. And just to kind of make sure that you understand what I'm talking about, let's go to our WordPress database, and let's go to our posts, and we'll browse. You'll see we have ID 1, 2, 3. This is kind of mixed up, but there is a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8's in there somewhere, 9, 10, 11, 12, on down the line. It numbers them on down the line. As the primary key, this is going to be the primary field that you use for sorting and all different sorts of things like that. Okay, so that's what the primary key is all about. And again, it's just a numbering mechanism, like with your Excel spreadsheet, how you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 down the side. This just You just have to explicitly create that with MySQL. All right, so that's what we're doing with this ID field. Right, so what we've done here is we've created an array, a multi-dimensional array that has our fields in it so that we can use that later on when we come down here to create our table. Okay, so it provides an easy way for you to add new fields to your script. So if you want to add a new field to your script, all you have to do is come in here and create a new array and fill out each one of the values, the name you want it to have, the type, the initial, the increment, and so on. And it provides a really easy way for you to create new fields. Okay, now our primary key again was the ID. Now we're going to start to get into, that's kind of just all setup stuff. All this stuff up here is just setup stuff. Okay, it's values we're setting so we can use them later on. We haven't actually done anything. Now we're going to get into actually doing something with MySQL. So the first thing that you need to do is you actually need to link to the server and MySQL. Okay, so the way you do that is a function called MySQL Connect. Okay, so if we come over to our database here, or our PHP manual, so you have MySQL Connect. And it takes a number of different parameters. It takes the server, which is going to be, again, 9 times out of 10, or 9.9 times out of 10 is going to be the local host. And then you're going to have your username, your password, and then you have a couple optional parameters, new link and client flags. And the new link is about, well, it says it here, if a second call is made to MySQL Connect, so if you make 2 calls in the same script, then it's not going to create a new link by default. It's going to use the one that's already been created. However, if you specify this new link parameter in one, it will then create a new link for you. So that's helpful if you're maybe connecting to different databases on the same server or things like that. This last one is client flags. These are flags that you can load in there. You can read about those here. We're not really going to worry about that right now. The big ones are the server, the username, and the password. Okay, and so if we come to our script, we see we have our host, our user, and our password, which corresponds to these variables. So our host is localhost, our user is root, and then our password is this. Okay, so that is your that's how you connect. And then of course we put this into a conditional if, again, hold on, let's come back to our MySQL Connect. You'll see that what it returns is a resource. Okay, and we're going to use that resource throughout our script. Now that's on success. On failure, it returns false. So that means we can use it as use a conditional if the link does not, if there's no link, meaning if it returns false, if this returns false, then we want to kill the script using die and output this error. Okay, so that's going to give us an error saying we couldn't connect to it, and it's going to specify the exact error as to why. Okay, most of the time it has to do with this was set to something that's not valid, or your username and password is off. That's 9 times out of 10 what it is. Okay, but MySQL Connect is how you actually connect. You always have to connect first before you can do anything. Okay, so you're going to be using this a ton. All right, next we have our create database part, and so again we're going to be creating, we're going to be working with MySQL statements. Okay, so first what I like to do is actually create the SQL statement itself. So I've made this the DSQL for database SQL variable, and in it then we actually just put in our SQL statement. So the statement in MySQL is create database and then the name of the database. So it's really simple. As a matter of fact, let's come over and let's go to documentation, and let's view the online version for 5.5, and let's come down and let's go to the functions and operators. Okay, and function and operator reference. Actually, you know what? That's not even right. I'm thinking of PHP again. We need to go to the reference manual and we need to go to SQL statement syntax and data definition statements. And now we have some of our different statements that we can use. And you can see that we have the create database syntax. Okay, so this is going to give us the syntax and spell out for us exactly how we need to use this particular statement in order to create a database. Okay, and then we can kind of click around in here and we can get different information about some of the stuff that we see in here. Okay, so anyway, this gives us the syntax. Now if we come back over here, it's actually really simple. It's just create database and then the name of the database that we want to create. Okay, so we've specified our name up here that we want to create, so I'm just using the variable here. If you were to use this and just type it out, it would actually just be like this. Okay, and you could get rid of this part here, and that would be your syntax or your statement for creating a database using PHP and MySQL. Okay, so now then we come in here and we do MySQL query, right? And if we come back over to our manual, I don't think I have MySQL query, but let's go ahead and bring that up. You can see it takes a string, which is the query string, an SQL query, and then the link identifier. Okay, so we have our DSQL, which is our string that we've created with the MySQL statement in it, and then we have our link identifier, which is this link up here, this connection that we created. Again, this returns an resource identifier that we then use throughout the rest of the script when it asks for a link identifier. Okay, so that's how that kind of all works together. So the MySQL query function, you have the main part is your SQL statement that you've created here. Okay, all right, so then again with MySQL query, you notice the return values. It's going to tell you a number of different things that it'll do, but pretty much always it's returned false if something goes wrong. Okay, so we can again throw it into a conditional, and if it all goes through fine, then we can echo it was created successfully. Otherwise, we can kill the script and say error creating database and output what error it was. Okay, so that's what we're doing with here, and again we're just creating a database. All right, so now the database has been created. Next thing we need to do is we need to select our database as the database we want to work with, because when we create this link, we're just creating a link to the server and MySQL. We haven't actually selected the database that we want to work with, because again we can have multiple databases on one server. So we need to select which database we're going to be working with. So we use this MySQL select database function. And if we come back over to our manual here, you can see we have a MySQL select database. We have a string, which is the name of the database that we want to use, and then we have again a link identifier. And so we come back over to our script and you see we have the name, which is the name of the database that we just created. Okay, and then we have our link identifier from our connection we created up here. Okay, again, if you'll notice, it returns a Boolean, true or false. True if it's selected, false if it's not selected. Okay, and so we can throw it into conditional. If it wasn't selected successfully, we kill the script, can't use it, we print out the error as to why. You remember from before, actually no, that was with create database, that was this MySQL error. We couldn't create it because it already exists. Most of the time what you're going to get with this one is couldn't select the database because the database doesn't exist. That means you either typed in the string wrong here for the name that you want of the database you wanted to select. You're not connected to the right, you could be connected to something wrong up here. The connection isn't right. So that database, since the connection is not right, that database doesn't exist on this server, this connection or whatever, so it can't select it. Typically those are the reasons why you're going to get an error when it comes to MySQL select database. Okay, so of course, if it does select it successfully, we can echo out selected successfully. Now, when you're writing your scripts, you don't have to echo this stuff out. In fact, most of the time you're not going to. But so you would just get rid of this else statement. You pretty much always, though, want to have in this, if it doesn't work, kill the script and throw an error. That way, you can see what the error is. You can see exactly where it's taking place, and you can actually output the error to try and figure out what's going on and troubleshoot. Okay, so most of the time you're going to want to have, well, pretty much all the time you're going to want to have these if statements afterwards, but you don't need to do anything if it's successful. You just continue with the script. But if it's not successful, typically you're going to want to kill the script and print out an error, especially when you're actually developing the script. That way you can see your errors. Now, you may do some stuff down the line with debugging as you put your scripts into production, so your users aren't seeing errors like that, and you can maybe work around it or whatever. But definitely when you're developing them, you want to kill the script and throw an error. All right, so now we've selected the database that we just created. Now what we want to do is we want to create our table. So again, we're going to create another SQL statement. This time, if you remember from before, we're using a concatenated equals, or when we create the string, we're concatenating it so that we can add multiple lines to what we're about to create. The reason we're doing that is because we're going to create multiple fields, and we're going to use a for each statement to output this MySQL statement. So you can actually use PHP to create the MySQL statement, as I'm doing here. So the MySQL statement starts off with create table and the table name, and then in parentheses is where you're going to put all of your different fields. Okay, so let's come down here and let's do echo SQL, and then we're going to, because it'll throw an error if we don't. So let's go ahead and we can link to it, but if we create it, it's going to throw an error. So because it already exists. So we'll comment out from here to here, and we will comment out this part because we're not going to actually create the table. It'll throw an error again. All right. So this will allow us to see our actual SQL statement. So I want you to see it first, and then it should hopefully make a little more sense. So let's refresh this. All right, so this is the SQL statement that we're creating, and this is how it looks. Create table, the name of the table we want to create. Then in parentheses, we're going to have the individual fields that we're going to create. Now, one thing to keep in mind with this particular statement, with the syntax, you'll notice there's a space here. You have to have that space. If you don't put that space there, this will fail. Okay, so that's one thing to keep in mind. All right, so now we have our table created. Now we're going to do the field. So you put the field name, the type, the initial, and whether auto increment or not, comma, field 2 name, the type, the initial, and we don't have an auto increment, so we're just going to leave that out, comma, field 3, type, initial, and then we have a comma, and we have a statement designating which one of these fields is our primary key. Okay, so this is what the SQL statement looks like. Now, to create it, we use some PHP magic so that we can easily add in new fields if we want to. So you remember from before, we created our array of fields. Well, down here we're going to use that array. So if we start off our SQL statement, and again we're using a concatenated equal sign here, and we created the table and the table name. We started our parentheses for the fields. Then we did a for each loop for our fields array. Okay, fields as fields. So for each one of these array items, we're going to create a SQL. We're going to add to our SQL statement, and we're going to output the field name with a space, the field type with a space, and the field initial value. Again, that's what creates this ID, which is the name, the type, and the initial value. Okay, that's what creates that. And for each one of those, it's going to loop through and create that. So that's how it actually loops through and creates this first one, the second one, and this third one. Okay. Then after that, if this increment is set to yes, which if we come up here, we have increment set to yes, and here we have increment set to no. If we have increment set to yes, it's going to add to the end of each one of these, whichever one it applies to, this auto increment statement. Okay, so if we come back up here, you see auto increments added here, but it's not on the rest because these don't meet the condition. And then we're going to end each, again, this is for each item in the array, so it's going to add the comma at the end. So that's what adds the comma at the end of each one of these. Okay. And then outside of that for each loop once, we're going to add in this primary key and p key, which remember we set up here was the ID field. Okay, so that's what's going to add in this primary key right here. Okay, and then we end it with our close parentheses. Okay, that dynamically creates our input field. So if we were to come up here, let's just copy this and let's give this a type of a name of input 3. Okay, and we save that. We refresh this. You notice that now we have an input 3 with all the necessary information we need in order to create that field. Okay, so that's a really, really handy way of creating this MySQL statement here. So then let's go ahead and uncomment and get rid of all this. Now that we have our SQL statement created, then we again just do a MySQL query to actually go in and create the table. We send that to MySQL using this MySQL query function. And then again, we store the result in a variable, and if it's successful or if it's not successful, we kill it and we throw the error, and if it is, we echo the table was created successfully. Okay, so that's how our create.php file works to create all the different elements that we need. So what we've done is we've connected to MySQL, we've created a database, we selected that database, within that database we created a table, and we gave it our primary fields. So this is a really, really quick and easy way of creating a database with the necessary fields. So if you have a script that requires a MySQL database and you need certain tables in it, then you could create something like this and use it as part of some sort of install script where users could enter their credentials, and then you could use the script to create the necessary database tables and fields that you need for your script. Okay, and we're going to talk about PHP classes down the line here in the course, and this is one of the things that we're going to create a class out of, because you'll be doing stuff like this a lot most likely with PHP, is creating tables and things like that. So we'll create a class out of this and show you how you can use it to make that whole process a lot easier for you. Okay, so that's creating everything that we need. So if we come back over and let's come back into our MySQL demo, and actually let's just delete it, and then we'll go to create.php one more time and show you this is what it looks like. You'll notice it connected, it created the database, it selected the database, and it created the table with the fields. And then if we come back over and refresh, here it is, the database, here's our table, and here's all of our input fields. And actually you'll see that our input 3, because I didn't remove that, so our input 3 is in there now. Okay, I'm going to delete this. We won't be needing that. Okay, so now the question is, okay, cool, we got our database and our fields created. How do we use it to store data? And so that's what we're going to talk about next. So there's going to be a couple things that you need. One, you need a HTML form that will submit the data. That's really simple. Okay, Really with the form, all you do is you put the action to your processing script, which is this process.php that actually does all the work. Use the method as post. You create your input fields, okay, give them a name, and we'll need that, and then you create your submit button here, okay. And so if we go to demo.php, you'll see that we have our two input fields, we have our submit button. Really simple, okay, and that's mainly HTML, so we're not going to talk about that a whole lot. What we are going to talk about is the processing script once this data is processed. So when you submit this form, all the data, when you use the post method, all the data is stored in an array called post, okay? And it looks like this, okay? This is the array. Now you can see we're getting specific data, but all of the data is actually stored in an array called post. And actually, well, no, that's not going to work. But so you can access all that data from this post array, and that's what we're going to do. Now, again, we'll start at the top, and you'll notice that we do a couple things again. One, we set our credentials just like before because we need them in order to connect to the database. We set the table name that we're going to be using. Again, we create a link because we always have to link to it using the same function and the same parameters. Again, we throw in a conditional check so that if it doesn't connect for some reason, we can kill the script and throw an error. Again, we select our database using the same function and the same parameters. Again, we've put it into a conditional and kill the script if it doesn't go through connect successfully. So you'll notice that there's a lot of code that kind of gets repeated. That's why when we talk about writing a class, I'm going to show you how you can actually keep this yourself from having to rewrite all this code. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. Now what we do is we get our values, okay? These are the values that were submitted in the form, okay? So we have input 1 and input 2 are the names of those fields. When this post array is created, the field names are used as a part of are used to designate the key names, okay? So let's just go ahead and let's do a print R on our post array, okay? And let's come, input 1 is test and 1. Let's submit this, okay? And something went wonky, so let's go look, and that's why, because I didn't do print R, I did print, and that's not going to work. All right, so let's go back, let's resubmit this. All right, so now we have our array, which is our post array, and you see our key for the first item is input 1, and the value is test, which is what we submitted, and then our key for the next item is input 2 and the value is 1, okay? So this is what the post array looks like. So it's just like any other associative array. So we can use that in our script because we want to get the values from that form and we want to put those into our MySQL database, okay? So let's go ahead and get rid of this. And now we're going to create a SQL statement, okay? Again, we're going to use insert into the table name that we're inserting data into. Then we're going to do the names of the input fields in order. Okay, so input 1 and input 2. Again, we don't need to put in the ID because it is auto incremented. So when we submit a new entry, it's automatically going to create its own entry and increment to the next number. So we don't have to worry about it. So we use input 1 and input 2, and then we say values, and we put in the values that we're going to use, and we use value and then value 2, which correspond to these variables where we got the values from our form that was submitted. Again, when you do this, these need to match up. So for input 1, you have the value for it. For input 2, you have the value for it. If you had 10 fields in your form or 10 inputs in your form, you'd have input 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then value 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay? So insert into table name, the inputs, then the word values in parentheses, and then the values themselves. And again, these need to be in these single quotations like this. Okay, all this syntax is very important. Every little space, every little comma, every little parenthesis, every little quotation, it's all very important. It has to be structured on exactly like this. Okay, so that creates your SQL statement. And again, get familiar with MySQL, learn the syntax. This is all MySQL stuff here. Again, the PHP stuff is easy. Now you've created that, so you're doing insert into, and you're restoring it as a SQL statement. We're doing the MySQL query, which sends it to MySQL, and MySQL will return a true or false. And if it's false, then we can kill the script and say, hey, there was an error. This is the error. Right? After that, we close. If you'll notice, I haven't put this on every one. You can and probably should explicitly close your connection. This closes when you do this MySQL connect. That opens a connection. This closes that connection. Okay. When the script gets done processing, so at the end of the script here, it's going to automatically close it anyway. But if you're working with a bunch of different parts coming together, it's probably a good idea when you're done with a connection to go ahead and close it so you don't have any issues come up. Okay. And then I echo the form was submitted successfully. The reason I do that is because we have all these different die, and if all this stuff doesn't happen successfully, it's going to kill the script right here, and the rest of this won't happen, so this won't even show up. But if all this stuff happens successfully, then it'll get to this point and actually echo this. And if we come back over, you'll notice that it's form submitted successfully. So if we go to our database and we go to our table, you can see that now we do have that data, test 1, test 1. And I submitted the same data twice. Remember, I refreshed it. So that's why we have two different entries. You'll notice ID automatically incremented itself, input 1, test, input 2, 1, and so on down the line. Okay, so that's what adding data to it does. Now, let's go ahead and view our data. And let's actually just do it first. Okay, so what this is really is just a simple print R on the array that gets returned, but you can see that when we view it, we have our individual data that's actually stored into our database. So if we head back over here to our code, then you can see that we have a lot of similar things going on. One, we have our set our database access credentials again, set our table name again, open a connection to the database again, kill it if it can't connect, select our database again, create our SQL statement. Here we're selecting everything from our table name, and then we're going to send the query using MySQL query and store it into a variable. This restores a resource. Now the one thing to keep in mind here is that this results field isn't going to be anything that you can work with. When you get this back, it's going to be in this particular form, when you're getting data from the database, it's going to be a MySQL resource. Okay, you won't be able to do anything with that in PHP. What you need to do is our one new function is this MySQL fetch associative. It could be fetch object, it could be fetch array, and you need to actually fetch the results and put them into an array from this resource, MySQL resource that gets saved here. Okay, so what that means is, well, let's go ahead and look at the manual for fetch. We'll actually look at fetch array. Okay, fetch a result row as an associative array, and a numeric array, or both. So with fetch array, you can have it saved as an associative array, an indexed array, or both. Okay, so this is one way of doing it. Now what we're using is MySQL fetch associative. This we're specifically saying let's fetch it as an associative array. Okay, so that's going to put it into a named array that we can then work with. We also have, if we come back over to our manual, we have fetch object. And so we can fetch it as an object here, and we can specify some other parameters, okay? So there's a couple of different ways depending on how you want to store it, whether it's an associative array, an object, or an indexed array. If you want to do an indexed array, I would use fetch array and set the result type to indexed. If you want to use fetch associative, use fetch assoc. And if you want to do an object, use fetch object, okay? So depending on how you want to use your data that you're using, you would use those different ones. But you need to do it some way. Okay, so that's going to actually get the data into a form that you can use inside PHP. And then, of course, at this point, it's just a normal array. And you can use the information we talked about in working with arrays to then actually output that data. So viewing it is actually really simple. The one thing that will come into play is selecting specific data, because you may not want the entire table. Okay, you may just want something very specific from that table. So again, you'll work with SQL. You can select certain fields. For example, you could select input 1 from table name. Okay, you could select all data and use a where statement. We're actually going to do that here in a second. Where, and you specify that a certain field value is equal to something. So you're getting data from the table where there's certain data that's actually in, or values that are stored in that particular field, and you just want those fields. So there's a number of different ways that you could do that, but again, that's just a matter of looking into MySQL and seeing how you can get in there and select the data you want. Okay, and then we're going to talk about that here in just a second a little bit more. So again, viewing data is actually really simple. It's just a matter of selecting what you need, putting it into transforming basically the resource into something that you can work with, and then once you have your array or your object, then you can just use it just like you would any other array. Okay, so that's how viewing actually works. Again, you'll notice most of this is the same stuff. Connect, select, create our SQL statement, send our SQL statement, get our results, and the one thing that's new is to actually turn that resource into something you can use, and then into an array, and then work with the array after that. So a lot of this is all the same. All right, so now the one last thing that we're going to work with is updating data. Okay, so let's say you have we have our data in our database and we want to update something in here. Okay, so if we go to update.php, you'll see that the update submitted successfully. And if we go back to view, you'll notice that now input 1 changed to update as opposed to test. And if we come back over here, we'll see that it was test. If we go back into demo 1, you see that it's now update. Okay, and we did that using this update script. So how does it work? Again, same data all at the top. Link to the server. If we can't link, kill it. Select the database we want to use. If we can't select it, kill it. Then we create a SQL statement. This time we're using the command update. We're going to update, and we're going to update this table, and we're going to set this field to this value where the ID field equals 1. So you'll notice that this only applies to this result right here where the ID field equals 1. Okay, number 2 didn't get updated. If you don't put in this where statement when you're doing an update like this, it's going to update all of those fields. So it would update all of the input 1s to that update value. So all these update 1s would get updated. So when you're doing an update, you always need to do this where something equals something. Okay, in this case, we're just using the ID and we want to update the first record. Now that's a really good reason why you want to use ID numbers in your database, because it gives you a really, really easy way. You know, you could have, again, we had all of our values were the exact same thing. If we were having to use input 1 or input 2 as our where statement, it would have updated all of these because they all had the same information in them. Okay, so that may come into play when, let's say you have someone, you want to update someone's information and you use a where statement based off their name. What if two people have the same name? Okay, or and again, you can get around that using usernames or emails and things like that, because those are pretty, you can, when you have your registration form, make sure those are unique. But using this ID just gives you a really, really easy way to reference a certain row that you want to update. Okay. So again, we create our SQL statement that updates that particular value. Again, we send it to MySQL using MySQL query, kill it if it doesn't go through, and echo updated successfully if it does go through. And again, you can see on this page, or actually we go back, update submitted successfully. Okay, so that is updating a value in the database, and those are really the big things that you're going to be using with PHP and MySQL together. Now, again, we haven't covered everything. One of the things, for example, we haven't covered is deleting. One of the reasons I didn't cover that is because a lot of times you're typically with the database, you're not going to delete stuff. You're just going to flag it as trash so that you actually have it still stored in the database, but when you view your results, you just put in a conditional that if something is marked as trash, you don't display it. Okay, so that's one thing why we didn't do it. Two is because you really need to get out there and go through MySQL and start learning some of this stuff on your own. Again, this isn't a MySQL course, so we're not going to be teaching you all the different statements that you can make with MySQL. And again, as you can see, the PHP part of it is really, really simple. You're doing a lot of the same things over again. It's really just a matter of coming in here and crafting these MySQL statements how you want them. Okay. Once you have that, then again, the PHP part's easy and you can work with the data in PHP. Okay. So that is working with MySQL using PHP, focusing on the PHP aspect of it. And we also did give you some of the core things that you need as far as MySQL statements to get going. Again, MySQL is one of those things you could spend a lifetime learning. So get out there, learn it, and as you're creating your scripts, use that manual to be able to look at these different statements and see how you got to craft them in order to get exactly what it is that you want. And you'll notice as you do that, you'll be able to get really, really creative with your statements and what you're getting and what you're doing. So that is PHP with MySQL, a little bit longer video because it really is a huge topic that you could spend course upon course upon. So hopefully that gives you a really good idea of how it works, how to work with it, and gives you a really good base for working with MySQL using PHP going forward. So hopefully that was helpful for you, and we'll talk to you again soon.